Janet, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you coming out tonight and
for having me. I'm excited to sit with you.
Yeah, I wanted to sit and have a conversation with you because I see you out in the community. You're seriously like spreading light wherever you go. You're just a joy and you do so much. So I want to understand, like, what all do you do?
I would say the biggest part of what I do is around literacy and making sure that community and our children and our families know about all the amazing stories that are being published in children's publishing right now. And so a lot of that is advocating for there to be access for students and kids through their schools, and also just encouraging people to consider the power of story and how that shapes our lives. And so a lot of what I do is just sharing and disseminating tons of great and amazing stories, and allowing there to be kind of these conduits that we cultivate through Black Child Development Institute or Black Lives Matter 5280. Like, how do we promote and share literacy resources in a meaningful way with folks in the community? The other piece of what I do, though, is around mothering, and it's around motherhood. So I do a multicultural motherhood blog for Denver that has festivals and fun things that families can do and mothers can do to kind of pour back life and light into their own pursuits. And then the last thing I do is I cultivate a women of color affinity group for Denver Public Schools, so that women of color who are dispersed around the district can come and connect and build community and sisterhood, and that pours back in again, just that people feel connected and people feel supported and people feel like they have community surrounding them.
With the three things that you mentioned that you do, why do you do that? Like, why is it important to you, or what's your story for why you do what you do?
So my background is that my dad and my family was a military family, and that means is we lived abroad most of my childhood. But even within that, I probably went to at least 12 different schools growing up, and every time we'd land in a new place, my dad would take me to a library first. And we would get myself set up with a card, and then through that, there were so many incredible adventures I had through stories. My father was also like that first librarian in my life because he always was curious about the world. My father was an avid fisherman. He loved nature, so a lot of what I did growing up was I was outside. I was either on the bank of a river or the bank of the sea, out on a boat in the ocean. And so that brought home to me just that books and adventures into nature were both big parts of what I did growing up. And so coming out of that, I recognized that in times where people feel like they're navigating the world and they don't really know where to get advice or where to be consoled or where to be inspired, you can always turn to a book. And so that's what's inspired me to create spaces where kids have access to that. But the other piece is that I was a really young mother. And so when I had my daughter, I was, still in high school. And so part of my navigating the world was through aunties and sisters and grandmothers. And I always leaned on women older than me for advice. And that allowed me to build a big community of women who cared about me and who poured wisdom into me. And that just helped me to go right into college, right into grad school, just helped me to surround her with so many creative women and great experiences. And so that's always been a part of how I navigate the world, is through sisterhood and through developing a connection with my elders. And I noticed that community is not always as present for younger mothers. And so part of what I do through Mixed Mama is just connecting women to other women that they can relate to and talk to and be inspired by. And
when you say Mixed Mama, is it all mothers who are mixed, or is it just called Mixed Mama because you're mixed?
Well, it's kind of a play on both, because I am mixed. My mother's Korean and my dad's African American. But also it's about that when we look at intersectionality, that really it's about all the mothers who have all the different experiences who can have an exchange, right? A mix of ideas, a mix of experiences, and that there's no one way to do it. It matters like what are the strengths and passions that we bring into it. And I think there was this time where it was kind of like when you became a mother, you should abandon all of the things that powered your creativity. And I think that's the worst thing that mothers can do. I think you have to find a balance between nurturing that. And so just a mix of moms who are making their way through all of this, you know, navigating what it is into this unknown, right? Like being a mother, it brings up a lot of things that we inherit from our mothers. It brings up a lot of, you know, are we doing it right? Are we creating the best environment for our kids? A lot of it came out of that.
And I know you're saying you went to books and everything, but what type of world did you have to navigate through? Like, what was it like for you growing up?
So there was a lot of like, oh, goodbye, hello, here I am. And so it actually cultivated in me an appreciation for accepting who people are in the moment and then enjoying the time I had with them. And then learning how to say goodbye and to release people and not have so much anxiety about that. I think, you know, you recognize that people come into your life for a season or even a moment, and you can have a beautiful exchange with them and create a memory that might last you for a lifetime, even though you may only have a short time with another person. So I think it just allowed me to develop a lot of resilience. Also, I just had this, they call it, I think, free parenting, or like, you know, my parents were like, go play, have fun, adventure, we'll see you guys at like 8:35.
Same,
And so I grew up, especially when we lived in Panama, like running through jungles and hanging out with friends and, you know, doing some like just real silly stuff. But it was really safe. And I think that was a huge part too, is that on the bases, you know, it was not, one of the biggest things I struggled with when we came back is that on a base, you are all organized by the rank of your parents, not race, not culture, not religion. It is all by the rank of your father. So everyone who lived in my neighborhood, all of our dads had the same rank. So there was no like, my family makes more than your family, or your family makes less than us. It was like everyone enjoyed that time. And you also couldn't kind of self-segregate yourself, because like you couldn't say, I want to live in a neighborhood that's predominantly black or a neighborhood that's predominantly white. Everyone was like, you're going to live in this community together. So it was interesting when I was in Panama, we had, my friends were Korean, and I had a best friend who was Puerto Rican and German, and I had other friends who were Samoan, and I had friends who were mixed with white and Korean. And then on our block, one of our neighbors moved in, and they were from Alabama, and they hung a Confederate flag in their garage. But their yard had the mango tree, and we always would climb this mango tree to get mangoes every season. And so we were kind of like, this could be a problem, right? So, but even in that, my dad went over, had a conversation with his dad, and pretty soon we all were having a conversation with his kids. And then by the middle of summer, we're all like hanging out, barbecuing together. And they didn't have to change who they were, and we didn't change who we were. But we found this middle space to just be neighbors, be friends. And
that is so nice.
That
is something like I wish that we can just do in general in the world. I feel like there's just so much division going on, and for you to have that type of experience growing up, I feel is so beautiful, and something that I wish a lot of people can have that. So do you feel like you didn't really experience any type of racism since that's what your life was like?
I think it was a different level of it. I think that, you know, we still watched the American news, and we still could see things that were happening in the nation, and that I think did impact our moods, but it still was like we were living in Panama. Like, we're American, and whether you are an African American or an Asian, like ultimately you were in this kind of little corner of the world where you recognize that ultimately we're Americans.
What type of advice would you like to give for people in the situation where there's just so much animosity because there are all these differences, and the type of environment you grew up in, and then coming here to Colorado and then experiencing what you experienced? Did you offer any type of advice, or like what would you offer now?
Well, I think what benefited me is that when I was a child, I was not just taken to like events, but my parents actually talked to me about how to just show empathy and love and respect for other people. And that was a big part of my father's modeling, is that you know, being from a very Jim Crow segregated Texas, my dad understood how racism worked, but he decided to be different in the world and to treat everyone he could with respect. And that's how he was regarded. People, you know, he would be warm to everyone, and that was repaid by people being really open and kind with my father and people who love him. But the other piece that I do recognize now is that we're under so much stress. Like I was watching a documentary and they were talking about the impact of stress on the brain, and really the part that it takes away first is our sense of empathy. So when we look at the struggles we're having right now in our country and our nation, you can see that it really, the root of it is this lack of empathy. And that's the first thing to go because we're under such duress. And I think there's this quote I heard once that said, you know, all hatred begins first as irritation, but it's cultivated. And so if we can begin to disrupt the idea first in ourselves that other people can't be who they are because it irritates us, and just recognize that respect is the foundation for how we can move in this world, maybe we can get to the place where we can even begin to have the conversation about the structural barriers, the embedded racism, the history. Like, coming to a place of healing is going to be, we're not set up for success in that yet. But if we can cultivate our own sense of empathy, our own mindfulness, our own healing, our own quietness in that storm that is America, then I think we can just begin to kind of have those conversations that will make the shift. And I think too, like, we are still struggling with ideas that are set up to separate people. And a lot of it comes from our sense of worthiness ourselves, right? Like, how in America it's really promoted that you are worthy once you are better than someone else. And that separation is the first falsehood that we fall for, right? Like, that I can be better than other people. And in some ways that will allow me to not look at the ways that other people are being oppressed, because if they were worthy, then they would be better too. And that's really, you can't move forward with that, right? Because you have to have a permanent oppression in order to feel good about who we are, right? But once we accept that we are all doing the best we can, and that we're all trying to have the same access to the love and care and the things that are really the most valuable. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of internal work, and just if we can all just kind of start with ourselves and thinking about what we've learned in this culture, what things we can begin to abandon in hopes that we can bring ourselves back to a place of self-love, knowing that we're worthy, period.
But school, for the most part, I'll just say, and this could be my opinion, who knows, but it's like we're indoctrinated into whatever the accepted beliefs are and the accepted behaviors are. And so it's not where it's like, well, let's see who you are and let's cultivate that and shape it into something where it can grow into where you can be a better person or have a stable income when you grow up or whatever it is. It's more of like, well, this is what you need to have in order to be successful in life, and all this other stuff just doesn't matter. But I feel like there's a lot of people out there who are starting schools that are focusing on your social emotional health and your gifts and things like that too. So I'm happy that that's happening.
I'm happy that's happening too. And I definitely see this return to what is it, like when you, I wonder sometimes when people start to build and design all of these hoops to jump through and all of these ladders to climb. If you think about what you remember as your best memories of school and of learning, like, your mind immediately starts to go back. I remember, like, I asked someone that and they were like, oh, and she was an elder, she was like 60. She was like, I remember this project where we had to design our own little mini countries and come up with the things that we sold, and we had to like create and exchange things with other countries. And she's like, you know, that learning, that idea that what we remember were those fun, engaging, exciting lessons that were not test driven. So it's hard to struggle right now, you know, like, I think we're trying to prepare kids for economies that don't really exist yet. Like, we're not even sure what it is that's going to be their ultimate, like, win. You know, it's like, instead of thinking about how do I cultivate this person to love learning their whole life? Because that's going to be a part of it. You're going to have to teach yourself over and over again for different careers and different technologies and different trajectories, you know? And at the same time, the critical thinking piece is always inherently the most important thing. And
Yeah.
yet sometimes that gets abandoned. So.
Do you feel like that is your focus of why you want to make sure children have access to certain books?
It is, and it's also because that's where the transference of culture comes from. And it's hard to have pride in yourself if you don't know the journey of your people. And I think that there's like the responsibility of legacy. I think that there's so much power in storytelling itself as a healing practice, as an oral tradition. When you think about just the memories that people can access through story. So I think for me, it's actually an inheritance that every child is a birthright. They should have access to the stories of their culture, the stories of their people, the stories of this nation. I think it's a disservice to all of us that we don't have all of those stories about the history of the United States, that we don't have, and that people aren't putting that, what we do have, the stories we do have in front of kids, that kids have to seek that out. But if we're robbed or we internalize this lack of care about history and culture and the legacies, then that's the ultimate shackle, right? Because now you are incarcerated within yourself. You're not seeking to learn more. You're not seeking to understand. And once that's taken, that's so hard to give back to a child. I mean, my dad spent tons of money on the first Encyclopedia Britannica, and he was so proud. It was like in a cornerstone of our home. And every time he looked and saw me using the encyclopedias, or he had this history collection called Annals of America that had all primary documents from, historical periods. And every time he saw me using that and citing it, he was so immensely proud. And that is something I carry with me my whole life. That's a gift, that's an inheritance that he gave me. That has nothing to do with money, but has to do with passion. And I think if families could pass that on, like, we're gonna be okay. Like, if we could pass that on, then we're gonna all be okay.
And all of that, so beautiful. And with the books that you are reading, though, is it, you're talking about the history and knowing where we come from and legacies and things like that, is it, a lot of it is also more of uplifting things to read? Because I feel like in school, we're taught all about our oppression. I feel like we're constantly shoved in our face being told, like, any person of color has been oppressed, and so are the books that you're sharing with others or making sure they have access to maybe about our history that is a part of the oppression, but also the successes, the innovators,
I think that what we arrive at is who's telling the story. So if someone's telling the story that's telling the story of the oppression, it usually is not the person who's telling their own story. When people tell their own story, even the trauma of it, they tell it from the space of, this is what I overcame, and this is how. And we call that enabling text. Texts that show us how to navigate the world as it is and retain both your soul and your heart and your power in that navigation. So when you think about artists like Audre Lorde or Maya Angelou, or even, people who are passing on this story of the hurts that they survived, when you read their story told by them, they tell you all the gifts. When you think about post-traumatic syndrome, there's also post-growth, right? Like that we can have post-traumatic growth after an experience where we all of a sudden understand how incredibly powerful we are.
Thank you so much, Janet, for being here and just sharing your wisdom, and please continue going out in the world, like leaving your love mark. I appreciate everything that you do and just empowering people to just know their worth and how beautiful they are and amazing they are. And it's not about what everyone else is doing, it's you and your own, only who you are. Just thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for doing this today. This has been beautiful. So good to have a conversation with you.
Thank you.